Chapter 9 Circuit Components. In order to pass the FCC exam, you should have a good idea of how the basic electronic components function. This is the operating characteristic, rating, advantage of the disadvantage, role of the terminology. Could you be sure of the questions of the capacity of the resistor, inductor, solid state diodes over the solid state components, vacuum tubes, and crystals. Some of the questions are prepared for the FCC study with the design with the presented here, with along with the answers expected to know with the state. With number 9.1, state the value of the challenge resistor that is color coded with a file with the red, black, orange, and gold. The resistor question would have as it 20,000 ohms with a tolerance over the 5% with a color band with the resistor read from left to right with the resistor with a horizontal with a color band close to the resistor end of it is left. First band with the first digit value with the second band with the second digit value with third band tell with the number 0 with the edge of the first two digits of the four band. Give the tolerance first band with a reference with the resistor is red with a reference with the digit 2 with the second band with the 0 stands for 0 with the third band range of the tells with 3 zeros with the first two digit. We have the left right at 2 to 0 to 3 0 triple 3, which gives you 20,000 ohms. So the tolerance of the band is usually silver or gold. Silver identified with the tolerance of 10 ohms. Gold is 5%. With no tolerance band it means that the resistor at 20 plus or minus percent with the color code resistance shown figure 9.1 color coding system on the left of the adaptive electronic industry in association with the system on the right is older than the joint Army Navy system, and unless the plan to work with the military surplus equipment really well is the electronic industry association. With the electronic industry association standing with a 6 color coded system would value the tolerance capacity with the first row colors with the left to right with the white, red, green, and the second row with the green, silver, the red. Value capacity with the 2500 microfarads, the tolerance with the plus or minus 5%. The Electronic Industry Association $6 6 dot capacitor color coded system involved with the reading of the two rows of 3 dots each with the shown in figure 9.2 with the 2 row dots are marked with the arrowheads easily enable the easy orientation by the reader capacitor so that the arrows are of the top row pointed to the right upper left with a dot with identified with the capacitor type with the second and third colors at the top of the row identified with the first and second numbers of value with the low right number of the second row identified with the multiply with a dot and the low center point position and the tolerances of error. Final dot lower left identified with the class of the capacitor with the other special characteristics shown such as temporary coefficients method of the testing. 9.3 What is the effect of adding an iron core to an air core with the inductance iron core inserted into the coil with the inductance of the coil with the product of the core permeability original inductance of the air coil is inductance equals the permeability of the iron core at 0. What should be the effect of the shorted turn off of the coil? The shorted turn off, shorted turn is iso over the main coil, acts of the transformer, secondary winding, since one turn has almost 0 to resistance with the inductance current of a single shorted winding is quite high, but the excess of the current with a single turn could generate with enough heat to burn through the surrounding insulation and destroy the entire coil. Resistor color codes. Directions of dot for type, first digit, second digit, multiplier, tolerance, characteristic class. That's capacitor dot codes. Characteristic vector diode makes desirable device desirable application involving the turning of the harmonic generation. The positive and negative junction of the diode exhibit the capacitance with the properties. The pollution area of the representative of the dielectrical adjacent semiconductor material of the representative of the conductive plates increases the reserve of the bad bias decreases. Density increases forward with the bias increases in it. When the forward bias is large enough to overcome the barrier potential with a high forward conduction, destroy with the capacity with the FX with a very high frequency, with therefore with effective capacity and function with external with applied voltage with the characteristics undesirable conventional diode operation, but is enhanced by a special doping with a very vector and variable capacity diode or varicap diodes. Application category of varactor can be divided into two main groups of tuning and harmonic generation. Difference with the characteristics of the two types, both with the voltage dependent junction capacitance effect with the 9.4 show with the voltage capacity relationship. 9.6 for the minute with the term capacity ratio as applied with the vector tuning diode with the capacitance ratio defines the tuning range is the amount of capacity variation over the bias voltage range. It is normally expressed with the ratio of low voltage capacity divided into the high voltage capacity. For example, the typical specification reads capacity for volts at 60 indicates the capacity voltage at 4 volt times 3 value is 60 volts, and the higher voltage ratio of the usually minimum breakdown voltage specification a 4 volt lower limit. Quite common sense with a describe the approximately lower limit of the linear operation on the most devices. Shows with a thread unscrewed with the iron core in the coil. Shows with the voltage capacitor relation capacities in 0 to 100 on vector A and vector B. Reverse voltage at 1.5. How many current stability obtained with the transistor amplifiers illustrated with the answer drawing simple circuit diagrams following the type of the amplifiers common emitter fixed or emitter with a bias with negative and voltage feedback. One method obtained with a good current stability with a common emitter amplifier with a near zero of the basis resistance swapping resistance shown in figure 9.5a. Resistors of the volt E is swapping the resistor secondary transformer T1 off to the very low voltage DC resistant base circuit. The fixed emitter bias can be obtained with a single battery common emitter with the amplifier by means of voltage divider. This is shown in figure 9.5b. Voltage divider consists of the resistor frequency resistor F times the resistor S. Voltage developed in the resistor B emitter base contributes to the emitter base of the current stability with the factor of the circuit with the equal the ratio combining resistor base over the base of the ground resistance by the emitter resistance lower with the base ground with the return of the resistance higher emitter resistant better current stability. Circuit employing negative voltage feedback will improve with the current stability shown in figure 9.5c with the collector current it rises with the collector base with the less negative between the DC with the drops of the resistor current capacity as a result. Less forward bias negative base to the emitter with its coupled through the resistor frequency with the onto the base reduce forward or revert resistor forward emitter reduce forward bias reduces collector current. Alright, 9.8. What is a junction tetrode transistor? How is it different from the other transistor for the base resistance of the operation frequency? High frequency can be amplified with a 3-terminal junction transmit with a limit of the input capacity of the particular output capacity of the transistor. One method of reduce the capacity with the reduce the size of the transistor semiconductor material. However, the method is physically limited to become the semiconductor material must be large enough so that it leads to the maybe even to be attacked for 3 reasons. Second method of restriction transaction action small portion semiconductor material with the small side of the transistor of the low input with the output capacity with the time to employ the later method of the tetrode transistor must be U with the tetrode transistor shown in figure 9c with the tetrode transistor constructed in the manner of a 3-terminal positive negative positive negative positive negative junction transistor except for the additional second terminal 2 base region of the terminal 1, 2, and 3 conventional emitter base of the collector terminals respectively are biased and same with the name of the 3-terminal transistor. The terminal 4 with the second of the connection of the base region by placing the negative bias of the terminal 4 using a battery of the voltage bias BB base bias, inductor voltage grade current of the base region with the not forward bias of the E with the negative of the base of the curve of the over the small portion of the emitter base function. Current emitted between the base and the collector all curve over the small portion of the collector base junction when effect with the input-output capacity is involved only with the active portion of emitter base junction and the collector base junction when respectively with the capacity value with a substantially reduced with the frequency response tetrode transmitter then substantially greater than that comparable 3-terminal transistors. In an electron tube with the means of the determinant of the amplification factor of the measure of the effectiveness control grid compared with the effectiveness of plate control plate current. It may be stated with the ratio of the chain with the plate voltage of the chain with the control grid voltage into the opposite of the direction of the current condition that the plate current remains unchanged. For example, if you were to plate the voltage at 1 volt per more positive, the current grid voltage must be 0.1 volt more negative with the respect of the cathode with the hold the plate with the unchanged with the amplification factor with the 1 divided by a tenth or 10. Other words, small variation grid cathode voltage same in effect with the plate with the current large voltage change with the later equal to the product with the grid voltage change in amplification factor. What is the inter-electrode capacity? Grid plate cathode triode form of the electrode state of the system and the electrode acting with the one plate with a small capacity with the capacity of those existing between the grid and plate plate of the cathode, grid plate, cathode, and grid and cathode. capacitance is known with the linear electrode capacitance represented in the figure 9. Some of the diverable capacity between the grid and plate is over the most important over the high gain radio frequency amplifier circuit with the capacitance may act to produce the undesired coupling between input circuit with the circuit between the grid and cathode. The output of the circuit with the circuit between the plate and cathode. The coupling is undesirable to amplify because of the instability and unsatisfactory performance. What is the purpose of the screen grid? The screen grid achieved the purpose of the minimize of the tubes with the inter-electrode capacitance with the triode principle to draw back to the high frequency result of the capacitance existence between grid and plate. Screen grid with a tetrode and a pentoid between the grid and plate with a diminished of the effect. With a variable plate with a compatibility of the beam of the power tube with the pento, with the show of the plate current with the plate voltage with the characters for the beam power with the tube with the conventional pento with the note with the rapid rise of the plate current with the beam power with the tube with the shown with the solid with the lines more gradual. The rise of the pento with the shown with the bi-broken line with the induced case power handling ability with the minimum distortion solid curve show with the zone with the plate current with the primary function with the plate voltage with the more with the limited with the beam power to plate current with the become substantially independent with the plate voltage with more lower values of the potential plate potential with the character of the enables of the beam power of the tubes with the handle great with the single power of the lower voltage plate voltage that ordinary pento with in addition with the power tube with the produce with the less distortion and then the ordinary pento with the well with the accompanying with the increased grade with the swing of the plate current with the change. Explaining operation of the diode type. The detector with the diode type detector is one of the simplest and most effective of the detectors, only the near with the non-linear resistance characteristic of the curve of the figure 99B with the type of the curve of the diode with the detector shown with the 99A operates round with the portion of the curve of the region of the low plate current indicates with a small signal with the output with the detector will follow the square law with the input signal with a large amplitude. However, the output with the detector is central linear with a positive direction of the operating point. The type of the detector is called the power detector since it handles with large input amplitudes without the put much distortion. Mutilated carrier with an entry with a tuning circle with a makeshift of the LC1. Designed with a receiver with a high degree of selectivity of the wave shape with the input with the diode plate with a shown on the figure 99C with the diode current. Diode conduct with the, only during the positive half cycle of the circuit to remove all of the negative half cycle to give the result of the figure 99D with the average output shown on the figure 99E. Although the average input voltage is zero, the average output with the voltage with the resistor always vary with above the zero, but it has the average voltage with the 50% of the capacitor, average curve of the times with the peak with the voltage, any part of the half cycle with the low bypass filter will made up the capacity of the two resistor R with the radio carrier frequency. So with the useful power of the receiver of the capacitor, two charges with the rapidly with the peak voltage with a small resistance of the R. The size of the R and capacitor resistor and capacitor two normally with a very short time constant with the audio frequency, very long time constant radio frequency carrying with the audio intelligence result of the output with the capacitor two with the circuit is varying voltage followed with a peak variation modulated carrier. The DC component produced with the detector with the circuit with a wave shape with the remove with the capacitor 3 with the providing AC wave shape with the figure 99G with the communication receiver. The DC component is often used for providing an AGC average AGC voltage. Advantage of the diode detector: high efficiency, 90% of the available, the proper design, higher power capability, no practical limit of the power level that could be handled with low distortion, higher input amplitudes, lower the distortion. Developable voltage can be used with the automatic gain control. Disadvantages: power is absorbed by the input circuit, with which lowers the circuit merit with decreased selectivity. No amplification power with the circuit in its entirety with the passive. With the 914 is one of the operation vacuum tube diode with the rectifier with the supply with the filter. Schematic: the typical low-wave rectifier circuit with even the twin diode with the illustrated with the 910 with the sum of the directly heated reflector rectifier tube. These with low resistance connected between the filament and the type of the cap with the center tap with the high voltage secondary with the simplified with the wiring metal chassis with the complete with the connection between the bottom and the load resistance. Secondary center tap with the schematically ground each over the 2 point with the additional secondary winding power transformer with the supply with the heater voltage with the other two with the must be containment and equipment. Operation full wave rectifier circuit is trial with an individual alteration total secondary voltage have with a numbered identification during with the pot with the alteration 1. Top of the end of the circle with the positive with the respect with the ground with the bottom of the end of the secondary and the negative with the respect with the ground. Upper with the diode with the necessary positive with the plate with the voltage. Ground with the conduction. The current with the flow with the ground up to with the load resistor with the cathode upper diode with the plate with the down with the half of the top half of the transformer secondary to shows low voltage 1, 2, and 3 on the top, sine wave on it, the resistor of the 1, 2, and 3, 4 as it's divided by the screen of the pentameter with the iron core and then 2 inductive and coils and The center tap of the makes back of the bottom of the load resistor, wherever the metal check of the current develops the pulse of the voltage across the load resistor that make for the top of the resistor the positive with respect to the ground. The wave across of the resistor show the load voltage alternation marked up with one diagram of the upper completion of the positive the alteration of the polarities of the cross of the secondary winding reverse of the makes of the plate with the top of the diode negative cover the top of the diode the cuff of the bottom of the diode plate with the positive becomes positive the conduction and overcurve of the path of the mark with the dotted arrows. The important fact to note about the circuit arrangement of the current flows through the load resistance with the same in the direction of the positive and negative alterations applied with the sine wave. When the output wave with a full wave rectifier with the examiner is consumed with the two plate with the current with the voltage for each cycle of the input voltage of the ripple, the frequency of the output full wave rectifier with therefore twice the line and frequency with a high ripple frequency output with a full wave rectifier with a distinct with the advantage of the result of a higher pulse of the frequency output more closely approximate and per DC easier filter output voltage normally usable without being filtered because of the high ripple content of the filtering method of the inductive capacity with the combination inductive capacitance with the illustrated with one and simple combination typically called the L filter inductive and the L with the directly shear with the rectifier with therefore with the classifier with the choke input type of the so this inductive shear with the rectifier transformer with the winding and the reactant with the coil effect with the charge of the time of the capacity with the charge of the capacitor one large would be same capacitor where you with the circle with no inductor with simple capacitance C filter action with the input choke with the lab with the continuous flow with the current with the rectifier with the become with the uniform flow with the current with the L type filter with the application of the high current with the incurve with the show with the output with the solid line inductor type filter imposed with the theoretical perfect the broken line with DC voltage while the type of the what type of the radio receiver the U with the vacuum tube with the dot of the dot recover the oscillator. Through such diode detect the receiver that involves nothing more than the tune shift of the rectifier with the tune of the radio frequency. Receiver which composed of the number of the radio frequency amplifier with the range frequency with the defeating with the detector stage. In radio receiver is another name for the mixture, but in this case of the radio receiver is the first detector is also employed. Discover the operation of the crystal with the diode detector with a small piece of the germanium silicone with the gelling iron pyrite quartz carbonium is capable of providing nonlinear diode characteristics wherever the direction. Crystal one over the element of the direct contact with the sharp point wire. One over these elements with the direct contact with the sharp point wire with arrangement with the off of the different resistance current with the crystal with the wire with the dozen with the wire with the crystal with the line with the vintage with the encapsulated with the type of the tank contained with the EXO lead so they often appear with a much like a resistor with the crystal with the detector with the excellent with the detector application with the ultra high with the radio frequency. They are typically used with the both mixed with the detector with the shown figure 912 with the characteristic of the crystal diode detector with quite similar with the vacuum tube with the type compared with the characteristic figure curve with the 913 912 with the radio frequency detector with the feed with directly with the antenna with the inductive capacitor circle will comply with the signal with the antenna with the diode therefore the other detect for the application of the radio frequency signal that may be decoupled with the other means. The detector diode conducts with only during the positive half cycle of the input cycle with the signal with the diode output with the rectifier version of the modulated input with the positive with the peak of the verified amplitude according with the audio frequency carrier with the radio frequency signal. Average voltage output will vary with above the zero with the audio rate with the average of the U with the provided the audio with the information simply amplifying output through the low pass filter with the low remove of the radio frequency component with the sketch of the low pass with the filter with the conjunct with the resistor with the capacity with the resistor capacity of the network has a short time counts of the audio frequency with between the low on one of the radio frequency output with the vary signal with the file with the peak variation modulated carrier. And then what frequency range with the electron tube with the diode mixture with the found with the widest application of this traffic the year with the diode control with a simple mixture tube with the noise figure with the good with the more with a complicated mixture with the circuit because over the low electroid incapacity with the diode with the Y with the VHF with the UHF with the application have with the local oscillator with the mushrooms with a considerable amount with the power diode mixture because of the low impedance diode tube. What constant voltage drop can be expected to drop with the mercury vapor tube with the mercury vapor tube with the sublimate with the today have been obsoleted with the solid state of the device. Nevertheless, given the applicant question will be covered the most frequent of the FCC study guide with an indicator with the issue of the working knowledge of the mercury vapor tubes. Since the voltage drops the with the mercury vapor tube with the remain with the constant 15 volt with regardless of the amount of current passing through with the has over the being better regulated with the output voltage and a high voltage power supply over conventional vacuum tube. Vacuum tube with the voltage drop the cuff of the tube will vary with the undervarying load condition with the mercury vapor tube and with the drop remains constant with thereby producing a more regulated output. Mercury vapor tubes are cooler operation high vacuum with the tube but there are more certain drawbacks. Show the electrical plate current with the plate voltage and the growth and then the circuit with a resistor capacity with a transformer circuit capacitor, two capacitors and totally safe with the full minute warm-ups due to the variation of the performance of the disadvantage have with the limited use of the mercury vapor tube on electronics. What crystalline substance of the will be either the crystalline oscillators, most widely the crystalline substance of the quartz of it must be either the natural or the man-made with the exhibited characteristic piezoelectricity, representing the amplified mechanical pressure of the cut with the generation of the voltage core of the cut and slab of the mount of the hinge of the sandwich crystal element between the top of the holes over the one over the electrode of the which made within pressure of the crystal over the oscillator crystal acts with the inductor capacitor resistor circuit of the both of the highly active and extremely stable. The note the sketch of the electroplate has shown connect with the extended out over the hole over the four contact feet with it provide with the air gap between the electroplate with the crystal with allowing it to vibrate freely. Whether the crystal and some of the oscillators are open to have the constant with the temperature with the resonant frequency with the more crystal with the chain with the slight with the temperature with the simple with the crystal with the frequency determining element that may transistor with the receiver that means with the provide with the maintain with the crystal temperature with the constant value within the most communication transmitter receiver crystal holder included with a special constant temperature oven. The principal factor of the listing some of the type of the capacity of the DC with the auto frequency of the DC dielectrical constant dissipation factor, the insulation quality with the electrical working voltage with the capacitor with none of these. The answer is C with the dielectrical insulators low frequency with the conductors are high frequency paper capacitors, for example, the well with the idea of the dielectric material and capacitor used at power line frequencies are less than worthless at VHF. Good capacitors of dielectric VHF include mylar, air, and some of the ceramics. Chapter 10, Practical Circuits.